Hello horse racing fans, and welcome to the third layer of the Kentucky Derby Iceberg, the middle point of our journey as we talk about all 150 horses who have won the most important race in America. Let's begin.
The opening half mile, 46 3/5 seconds.
Assault. To kick off this layer, let's talk about the least well-known Triple Crown winner. Assault was the third of four Triple Crown winners in the 1940s. From birth, he didn't have the look or origin of a champion. He was born in Texas, an unpopular horse racing state, and as a foal, he impaled his right front hoof on a surveyor stake, causing him to walk with a limp. But there was no issue when he galloped. Still, it gave him the nickname of the club-footed Comet. He did win a major Derby prep in the Wood Memorial, but experts said he won the race in a slow time. He then was fourth in the Derby trial, his final prep, making him fourth choice to the favorite Lord Boswell. In awful mud, he then ran the race of his life, winning the Derby by a tied record margin of 8 lengths. As fantastic of a win as you could possibly do. And fun fact, the footage of his win was used briefly on screen in Back to the Future Part 2, during the Biff Tannen Museum film.
See Biff's humble beginnings and how a trip to the racetrack on his 21st birthday made him a millionaire overnight.
But right after his win, the first thing that made headlines was that experts thought he wouldn't win the Triple Crown. In the Preakness, he was bumped early and rushed to the lead, using up valuable stamina, winning by only the skin of his teeth to Lord Boswell. It was such an unconvincing win that he's the only Triple Crown hopeful not to be favorite in the Belmont Stakes. Everyone was worried about his stamina and put Lord Boswell as the slight favorite. But once again, Assault had other ideas. Lord Boswell finished 5th, and Assault surged past Natchez to win the Triple Crown. Assault proved to be a real warrior as a 4-year-old, battling with other great horses of the time for the honor of the richest racehorse in history, winning major races carrying massive weights up to 135 pounds. His main rivalries were against two geldings. One was another Texas-bred, Stymie, and the other came from Calumet Farm, in Armed, who obliterated Assault in a 100 grand match race, the last Triple Crown winner to participate in such an event, all of which lost. He ran longer than he should have, being brought out of retirement twice due to being sterile, and retired at 7 years old, living peacefully at his birthplace in King's Ranch till the age of 28. Pensive. The near miss. There are a few ways to win 2 jewels of the Triple Crown, but the most heartbreaking is to then lose the Belmont Stakes. Pensive was the first hopeful to leave Belmont Park empty-handed. In a twist, he almost didn't run in the Kentucky Derby. Even with a win against older horses, Ben Jones thought he wasn't good enough to be in the Derby after finishing a disappointing second in the Chesapeake Stakes. But Pensive's jockey, Con McCreary, begged Jones to let him and Pensive prove otherwise. And with a wide-open field that had no clear standout, Ben decided to enter the horse he thought of as just average. If it wasn't enough for Pensive to be doubted by his own trainer, in his final workout, he stepped on a nail, but was still considered fit to run. With all obstacles overcame, it was now time for the race itself, and he would go from the back of the pack all the way to the front and defeat the favorite Stirrup, ironically ridden by Eddie Arcaro. The victory was a surprise to all, except for Atlanta Journal sports writer Ed Danforth, the only turf rider who picked Pensive to win. He and McCreary had gotten the last laugh. 1 week later, by 3 parts of a length, he took the Preakness. He had meteorically risen to being a Triple Crown hopeful, only 1 year removed from Count Fleet, and 3 years from Whirlaway. Although turf riders still doubted his abilities, not even his own trainer was convinced. Pensive led into the stretch, a few horses being predicted to beat him, but not many had guessed the 16-1 shot named Bounding Home would sweep to the outside and defeat Pensive by just half a length, the first but not the last Triple Crown spoiler. It was also his only stakes win. Still, despite never being considered great, Pensive was half a length away from joining Immortality, something that deserves praise 80 years after the fact, and forever after. For the rest of the year, Pensive never won again, and Calumet's best 3-year-old was instead the legendary filly Twilight Tear, who won 11 straight and beat Pensive multiple times. He wasn't even the best colt. By Jiminy stole the show with a great second half of the season. As a sire, though, he produced 41 winners from 53 foals. The highlight was Ponder, who won the 1949 Kentucky Derby. Only 13 days later, Pensive passed away. But thanks to Ponder, he created a unique piece of history, a 3-generation Kentucky Derby winning dynasty, as Ponder would then sire the 1956 Kentucky Derby winner Needles, a feat only matched by Ray Count. Riva Ridge. We all know Secretariat, and some might have seen the Disney movie, where he saves his farm, Meadow Stable. What the movie doesn't tell you is that the real savior of the farm was Riva Ridge, a small, lightly framed bay horse. He and Secretariat may have worn the same hood, but physically, they could not have looked more different. With Meadow's head, Christopher Chenery, hospitalized since 1968, Penny's siblings pushed her to sell the farm. But that conversation ended when Riva Ridge became champion 2-year-old of 1971. The following May, he was the favorite for the Kentucky Derby, with his only hiccup being a 4th in the mud. He won easily on a fast track, being the horse to fulfill Christopher Chenery's lifelong dream of having a Derby winner, passing away in January of 1973. And in my opinion, Riva Ridge was good enough to win the Triple Crown, but the Preakness came up sloppy, his kryptonite, and he finished 4th a second time that year. But he then bounced right back and won the Belmont by a solid 7 lengths. He was insanely talented, 17 wins from 30 starts, and still holds his own world record at 1 mile and 3/16 set in the Brooklyn Handicap. Many of those 13 losses came against top-class racehorses, or were due to being in races he shouldn't have been. In 1972, despite being a muddy track away from winning the Triple Crown, he lost Horse of the Year to a 2-year-old Secretariat. And not just that, he took no end-of-year championships that year. Only 3 weeks after the Triple Crown, he went to California and won the Hollywood Derby, carrying 129 pounds, similar conditions that led to Seattle Slew's very first defeat. But the race was so tough on him, he was never the same that year, and never won another race as a 3-year-old, as regular rival Key to the Mint took the 3-year-old championship. As for 73, with a world record in New York less than a month after Secretariat's Belmont Stakes, at one point they were going to run in a match race for $250,000. But they both lost prep races leading up to it, so it became an open event called the Marlboro Cup. Riva Ridge set a world record for 1 mile and an eighth and beat the best horses on both coasts. But so did Secretariat, winning by 3.5 lengths to his stablemate. While he was overshadowed by some due to who he had to run against, he was never forgotten by those closest to him. Secretariat became the people's horse, admired by all, but Riva Ridge was Penny's horse. She of course loved Secretariat, but the horse she was closest with was Riva Ridge. She was once quoted as saying, "He was my hero. I knew I meant something to him." Old Rosebud. He had some of the greatest highs and lows of any racehorse. Starting as a skinny $500 bargain, his career was full of races, but also setbacks. He won 12 of 14 races at 2, setting many records, was then injured in August of that year, but returned just in time to win the Kentucky Derby by 8 lengths, a margin only equaled and never bettered. But 3 weeks later, after failing to change lead legs in a clockwise race, something never run in America today, he bowed a tendon and was gone for 2 years and 9 months. What brought him back to the track? The story goes that a backfired car exhaust spooked him and his paddock mates, and he was leading the herd. He returned and won 15 of 21 races as a now 6-year-old, against the best horses, carrying heavy weights. He'd always find a way to win, but injury kept haunting him. After this comeback season, he was sidelined for 1.5 years and returned again as an 8-year-old. Despite still winning, he in reality should have never returned. Every year, he ran in worse and worse races until he was an 11-year-old claimer. After finishing 7th only a few days later in a workout, he broke down, and this time, the comeback king couldn't. 40 wins in 80 starts, and 10 years of racing, the second greatest record in Kentucky Derby history, but never given the proper retirement that he deserved, due to the time he raced. Broker's tip. When you own a racehorse, the big race everyone wants to win is the Kentucky Derby. Well, what if that was the only race your horse ever won? That was the case for Broker's tip. In 14 races, he had 1/3, 2 seconds, and a single victory, the Kentucky Derby. And the way he did it was as dramatic as you could ask for. Headplay was just outside the favorites, being considered smart money. Less than 24 hours before the race, he was bought for $30,000, making the next part extra painful for his new connections. Broker's tip was an outsider, given legitimacy in spite of never winning a race, mainly for his Kentucky breeding and his respected breeder, Colonel E.R. Bradley, who had won 3 derbies already, including the previous year's running with Burgoo King. Ironically, Bradley predicted the favorite Ladies Man would win, not his own horse. Headplay took the lead with half a mile to go, while Broker's Tip started from 11th of 13 horses early, but by the top of the stretch, the two led the pack and no one else came close. With not as many cameras or rules in those days, Don Meade on Broker's Tip and Herb Fisher on Headplay got into an outright brawl mid-race, as they employed any tactic necessary, grabbing each other's saddles, reins, using whips as weapons, and also their bare knuckles, leading to this iconic picture known as the Fighting Finish, the most requested photo from the Courier-Journal. Fisher protested the race after Broker's Tip was declared the winner, but the result stood, because both jockeys were found to be equally at fault. Although they both faced suspension afterward, when the race was over, the fight continued in the jocks' room, their bloodlust unable to be torched. One great race that defined an otherwise forgettable career for Broker's Tip. He was injured later that year and failed to win as a 6-year-old after a long break, and sired a few decent horses, living till the age of 23. The purest form of one-hit wonder, because he only took the most important prize of them all. Majestic Prince. John Longden is best known as one of the greatest jockeys to ever live, finally retiring in style in 1966 by winning a 3-horse photo finish in front of 60,000 people at Santa Anita. But that same year, a horse would be born that he would not ride, but train. This horse went into the Kentucky Derby undefeated, donning a unique orange cheeker bridle. But this wasn't Seattle Slew. This was Majestic Prince, who unlike the later Seattle Slew, was believed to be great from day one, purchased for a record $250,000 as a yearling. While Longden could no longer ride him in races, he would still exercise on the back of Majestic Prince in the mornings, giving him a unique gauge on this horse that helped keep a perfect record. He had won 7 straight before the Derby, being the best in the West, while Top Knight was the best in the East. On Derby Day, Majestic Prince was a slight favorite, endorsed by none other than President Richard Nixon to win. The battle with Top Knight wouldn't occur, but instead it was with third choice Arts and Letters, a brilliant horse in his own right, but on their best days, Majestic Prince beat him twice by just a neck in the Derby and Preakness. In a surprising turn of events, Longden initially backed out of the Belmont and the Triple Crown due to a tendon injury. It led to harsh debate, because the injury was mild enough he could still run, but not to the best of his ability. But Longden's decision was overturned by his owners, and even with a tepid pace, the off-his-game Prince finally lost to Arts and Letters. Longden knew him best, and he didn't think the horse should have run. He was right. He never raced again, becoming a fine sire, but that final defeat was an underwhelming end to an otherwise perfect racehorse. Still, Longden with Majestic Prince became the only person in history to win the Kentucky Derby as both a jockey and a trainer, and was only one jewel away from winning 2 Triple Crowns in 2 different ways. Carry Back. Back was certainly accurate. Carry Back loved to start at the bottom and fly past horses late to win. A small Florida bred, the purchase of his mother and the breeding fee of his father combined to only $700. He retired the 4th horse in history to win $1 million. Helped by the fact that he was insanely durable. Starting his career 2.5 months before he turned 2, he ran 28 times, including 7 outs in just 2 months before the Derby. He wasn't bad either, taking multiple major prizes and becoming the favorite. In both the Derby and Preakness, he would seem too far away to win, but the undersized solid bay with incredible acceleration thrilled the crowds as he'd sweep by and do the impossible. But in the Belmont, he only did the first part of his act, finishing 7th as 65-1 shot Sure Luck spoiled the Triple Crown. But that was far from the end of Carry Back. He ran many more times against the best horses in America, improving his abilities and even gaining versatility by being able to run closer to the leaders to win shorter distance races. He set 2 track records, including getting to beat the greatest gelding of all time, Kelso, who dominated the entire first half of the 60s. And later, Carry Back would race in France for the world's greatest turf race, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, a unique thing for any Derby winner to do. He finished 10th out of 24 horses, but was only beaten by 5 3/4 lengths. He even retired and was brought back as a 5-year-old. It was initially considered a failed move, but he managed to wrap up a 62-race career as a winner in the Trenton Handicap, and lived to be 25 years old. He was one of the most durable, visually impressive, and likable Derby winners, a horse with humble beginnings who earned all $1.2 million through hard work and taking on everything with 4 legs. Bold Forbes. The Puerto Rican Rolls Royce. Bold Forbes had early speed rivaled by few. He was born to sprint, but his heart carried him across distances he shouldn't have been able to go. But he wasn't always thought of as a Kentucky Derby horse. He was once a $15,200 yearling purchase sent to the island of Puerto Rico, and when he made his debut, the bettors put him at odds of 35-1. He then won that race by 17 lengths, and things began to change. When he finished his time on the island, he was unbeaten in 5 starts by a combined 51 lengths. His final 2-year-old record was 7 wins from 8 outs, with his speed carrying him to 2 stakes wins in New York. He stayed winning, now on both coasts as a 3-year-old, but was still considered a miler at best. His first attempt at 2 turns was the Wood Memorial at 1 1/8 miles. Jockey Angel Cordero, a Puerto Rican as well, and Cuban trainer Las Barrera worked the horse over long distances to build his stamina. In a twist, Angel Cordero's very first race was in Puerto Rico with Bold Forbes' owner, Esteban Rodriguez Tizol, 16 years prior. Fast forward, Bold Forbes won the Wood Memorial gate to wire in stakes record time, and they were all going to Louisville. He was a distant second choice to the 2-5 Honest Pleasure, riding off the heels of Foolish Pleasure, who had won a year before. 2-5 is tied for the lowest odds ever seen in Derby history, but the 3-1 Bold Forbes trained up to the race with 2-mile gallops. He was sent to the lead, and as everyone waited for Honest Pleasure to pass him, it never occurred. Bold Forbes was victorious. But his Triple Crown bid ended after running the fastest 3/4 of a mile ever seen in the Preakness, 1 minute 9 flat, and also having a cut on his left hind mid-race. Still, despite no obligation, he was sent to the Belmont Stakes, a race that even his early speed seemed unable to match. The Belmont was an outrageous display of courage. Unable to be quelled, he ran the first mile in 1 minute 36, a feat only bettered by Secretariat at the time. By the final 1/8 of a mile, he still had a 6-length lead, but was running on fumes. Despite tiring badly, Angel's strong hands and Bold Forbes' courage crawled him over the finish line as 2 horses swarmed him late, and just missed. With all of Puerto Rico watching, including its governor, he had won. He retired later that year with 13 wins from 18 starts, never finishing worse than 3rd, and after a decent stud career, lived out the rest of his days at the Kentucky Horse Park. The first, but not the last Derby horse to retire admired at this great place. Tim Tam. Tim Tams are one of the most popular snacks in Australia. 2 delicious biscuits covered in chocolate, separated by a creamy center. Tasty on their own, and also a great straw for hot beverages for what's called a Tim Tam Slam. But did you know that this famous snack from Down Under was named after a racehorse from the other side of the world? Now that's something Seabiscuit can't even claim to do. In 1958, their creator Ross Arnott visited America. He had an idea for a new line of biscuits, but didn't know what to name them. He'd get his inspiration when he attended that year's Kentucky Derby. The field had a few favorites: champion 2-year-old Jules Reward, Silky Sullivan, a West Coast horse famous for winning races as far back as 41 lengths, and Tim Tam, the Calumet horse, who had only raced once as a 2-year-old, but in only 4 months had raced 10 times, including winning his last 6 in a row. As he rallied home the winner, Arnott thought to himself, "That's a perfect name for a biscuit." And 6 years after seeing the horse win, the first Tim Tams were released, quickly becoming a household food item. As for the horse, he wasn't too shabby either. He nearly won the Triple Crown, taking the Preakness, following in the footsteps of other Calumet greats. He seemed nearly unbeatable on Belmont Day, but in the stretch, he fractured a sesamoid bone, and the Irish horse Cavan would win. Tim Tam finished the race on 3 good legs to be second, and never raced again, but lived a full life, siring a Hall of Fame filly in Tosma, and many great horses as a dam sire. He died at the age of 27, now immortalized in the Racing Hall of Fame and by delicious biscuits the same color as his coat. Chocolate. Grindstone. The closest Kentucky Derby in history was in 1996. The subjects were Cavanier, who was the first Derby horse for his trainer Bob Baffert. The other was Grindstone. He was an accomplished horse, winning the Louisiana Derby, but he was a slight outsider. Unbridled Song, another son of Unbridled, was the favorite, and Grindstone was one of 5 entries for Dwayne Lucas in that year's Derby, making it hard for him to stand out. Starting in 15th position, he navigated in and out of horses, while everyone else focused on Unbridled Song and Cavalier. In the stretch, it looked like Unbridled Song had it, but he faded fast as Cavalier took over, but on the far outside, Grindstone flew forward, and at the wire, they were inseparable. Nobody knew who won, not the jockeys or the trainers, but at the finish, it was Grindstone by a nose. Lucas had won his 3rd Kentucky Derby, while Baffert had lost his first attempt at the race by the closest margin possible. Not sure of yet that he'd ever have a chance again. It was one of the best finishes the Derby ever saw. It was also Grindstone's last race. Following a bone chip, he was retired, and after the Triple Crown, the Great Gray Skipaway proved to be the best 3-year-old. Grindstone proved to be a successful sire, producing infamous Triple Crown spoiler Birdstone, who would then go on to sire 2009 Kentucky Derby winner Mind That Bird. Grindstone lived to be the ripe age of 29. Black Gold. A tough example of people going to the well too many times, Black Gold's mother, You See It, was a sprinter who won 34 of 122 races. After retiring and the death of her owner, Al Hoots, his widow Rosa would breed her to a classic distance horse named Black Tony, who could counteract You See It's low stamina. What they got from this mating was Black Gold. He was a small but strong jet black horse. His name might sound obvious, but along with his coat color, it also comes from Rosa Hoots, who was half Osage, and Black Gold was slang for oil, which Osage discovered on their lands in the late 1890s. Fast forward to the 1920s, oil money had given Hoots the chance to own and breed a racehorse, but at the same time, Osage people were being murdered for that very oil money by white men. When Black Gold crossed the wire first, his victory proved historical. He had become the 50th winner of the Kentucky Derby, and Rosa Hoots became the 2nd woman to own and breed a Kentucky Derby winner, exactly 20 years after the first. And she was the first person from any Native American tribe to sit in the owner's box, let alone win the race. The trophy commissioned for the 50th Derby was the winner of a contest to celebrate the Golden Jubilee. The trophy was so well liked that it became the modern Kentucky Derby trophy, still used 100 years later. In a surprise mystery, the original first Derby trophy, given to Hoots, was stolen in 1935, and the quest to find it still remains. It was a Kentucky Derby of many firsts, but sadly Black Gold's story did not end with the Derby. He initially kept the momentum going, winning 4 Derbies as a 3-year-old, the Louisiana, Kentucky, Chicago, and Ohio Derbies, but he retired lame and at stud was sterile, siring only 1 foal who was then killed by lightning. With no stud career, he was brought back to the races. He would be winless in 5 starts during his return, breaking down in his last race, and had to be euthanized. An inexcusable conclusion to the life of a great racehorse. His story has since not been forgotten, with books and even a heavily fictionalized movie bearing his name being made, featuring legendary actor Anthony Quinn from Lawrence of Arabia, in an albeit questionable starring role. He was buried in the fairgrounds infield, the track where his career started and ended, right next to the great mare Panzeretta, ironically a horse who defeated Black Gold's mother, You See It, multiple times. His story, while sad, is important to acknowledge as we have continued to improve the fates of our racehorses, big or small. Sea Hero. Sometimes things are just meant to be. Owner and breeder Paul Mellon seemed to be on his way out of a great horse racing career. 85 years old, with champions on 2 continents. The biggest ones were Arts and Letters, who we had mentioned earlier, and Mill Reef, one of the best to ever race in Europe, winning the original Epsom Derby, and the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, 2 of the greatest races in all of Europe. But the Kentucky Derby proved elusive, and by 1992, he had already dispersed most of his horses, but he kept Sea Hero, who had won the Champagne Stakes as a 2-year-old. But he had not won a stakes race since that October, with his final prep being a 4th in the Bluegrass Stakes. Mellon and trainer Mac Miller were 50-50 on even running him after that disappointment, but decided to anyway. Jockey Jerry Bailey, who had yet to win a Kentucky Derby as well, was so doubtful of his chances that he told his wife and child to stay home. But as he took the horse back, things started to look up, and he navigated in and out of horses easily, and then came the moment of truth. At the top of the stretch, Bailey took him through on an opening on the inside, against Mellon's instructions, but that opening gave Sea Hero the lead, and he ran away a 12-1 upset victor, giving Bailey, Miller, and Mellon their first Derby victories. It helped that that Derby victory was also on Mellon's 45th wedding anniversary, and it made him the only person to ever own and breed a winner of the Epsom and Kentucky Derbies. What a gift. Sea Hero had one more moment in the sun when he won the Travers Stakes, a rare double. That victory, and Mellon's love for art, helped immortalize him with a statue which still stands near Saratoga's walking ring to this very day. When he passed away at 29 in Turkey, where he had stood a stud for years, the statue was honored with roses draped on it, a fitting tribute to a horse who may not have always been great, but in just one race, realized the dreams of a special few. Cannonade. In 1974, a major milestone was going to be hit by America's greatest horse race, the 100th running of the Kentucky Derby. Hot off the heels of Secretariat's Derby victory a year ago, everyone was excited. Over 163,000 people showed up, a record at the time, with many dressed for the occasion, including Princess Margaret, while some chose to dress less modestly. The most memorable was a streaker who climbed up a flagpole. As for the horse race itself, 23 horses entered, the largest field ever assembled. The field lacked a standout favorite, so everyone was taking a stab. Cannonade was technically a slight favorite, but in a coupled entry. People preferred his stablemate, Judger, who finished ahead of him 3 times on the Florida circuit. Most of Cannonade's wins came during a jam-packed 2-year-old season, where he won 5 of 17 races. His only win as a 3-year-old was the Stepping Stone Purse a week before the Derby. The worry for Cannonade was that he would get impatient waiting for 21 other horses and get trapped on the inside, but neither occurred. In fact, the rail was wide open on the backstretch, giving Angel Cordero a perfect opening as he moved Cannonade from mid-pack to 3rd without anyone getting in his way. After splitting the last 2 horses, he was clear. He won by 2 1/4 lengths, with a brilliant race ride and the misfortune of the tougher competitors. Trainer Woody Stevens and Angel Cordero won their first Kentucky Derbies that day, and after Cannonade retired, he rewarded Woody Stevens once again by siring one of his 5 historic Belmont Stakes winners in Caveat. But the real lasting legacy of this Kentucky Derby was the rules it inspired. The chaos of the 23-horse field had unfairly hampered many horses' chances, including that year's Preakness and Belmont winner Little Current, who flew from 23rd to 5th after outrageous traffic. Only a year later, the Kentucky Derby officially capped its field size at 20, and led the Derby down the path of restricting the race further, by giving priority to horses with greater prize money to ensure quality instead of just paying an entry fee like before. Starting in 2013, this would change again to the Road to the Kentucky Derby series, where specific races earned horses points, all thanks to the pandemonium of the Centennial Kentucky Derby. Pleasant Colony. Even with new rules, the Kentucky Derby can never be predictable. Just 2 weeks before the Derby of '81, Pleasant Colony made his first start for trainer John Campo, who thought he had a good one, but no one matched his enthusiasm. Most saw Pleasant Colony as an unimpressive horse statistically and physically, with a tall, skinny frame, floppy ears, and a gnarly burn scar on his left flank, not helped by a 5th place finish in the Florida Derby last time out. But in 1 month, he would put on some muscle and become a new horse. 7 hours after lightning struck the toe board, Pleasant Colony stayed back and passed the exhausted frontrunners for a surprise victory in the Wood Memorial. The 180 made him second choice by Derby Day, but the lead up to it was pure chaos, because once again, 23 horses had entered the Kentucky Derby, but with the new 20-horse restriction, 3 had to be pushed out, and one owner wasn't very happy, and quickly took it to court, and got back in thanks to a rule that stated that a coupled entry, 2 horses with the same owner or trainer entered as one betting entry, couldn't exclude another horse. And there were 2 coupled entries in this Derby field. The court case started and ended the day before the Kentucky Derby and got 2 of the 3 excluded horses back in. Ironically, the horse that started the whole court case by entering, Wayward Lass, was scratched the same day. And so 21 horses went to the starting gate, the last time a Derby field would exceed 20 horses. Campo would praise his horse, Pleasant Colony, for the 2 weeks leading up to it, saying that he had the winner, while people preferred Proud Appeal, who was undefeated in 5 starts at 3. And so, the gates opened, and it was time to see who was right. The field roared, and Top Avenger led the pack, setting record-breaking early fractions for the quarter and half a mile. This unsustainable speed would lead to a pace meltdown, and all the top finishers came from the back. Pleasant Colony rallied from 17th place, and runner-up Woodchopper came from 20th, while the favorite Proud Appeal had the worst finish of any Derby favorite in history, 18th place. Pleasant Colony had made Campo right, and he made sure that everyone knew it afterward.
What made you so certain before the wood? You say, make your bets and go to sleep on it. It's all right, we're going to win. You said the same thing on Thursday here.
I'm a good horse trainer, pal. Don't ever forget it.
Campo's confidence continued to the Preakness and got him past the wire first. But leading up to the Belmont Stakes, something changed. The day before, Campo told his team they were not going to win. The horse had lost weight and was tired. They couldn't believe it. But once again, the now subdued trainer was right, and Pleasant Colony finished 3rd. He only ran 3 more times after that, valiantly losing the Travers Stakes in the mud and beating older horses in the Woodward Stakes. And then after retirement, he became a very good sire, producing classic winners in America like Pleasant Stage, Pleasant Tap, and Pleasantly Perfect, and in Europe, he sired not a Derby winner, but a Derby winner in Sanjovite, who ran the fastest Irish Derby in history, and also won the King George in England. Pleasant Colony lived to be the age of 24, a great horse on and off the track, but still a bit underappreciated. Swale. He represents the highs and lows of racing. One of the best sons of the immortal sire and racehorse Seattle Slew, like his dad, he was a nearly black stallion who won the Kentucky Derby, but just 44 days later, he would unexpectedly pass away. He was born in 1981, and as a baby he was spotted sleeping away from his herd on a low-lying piece of land, a swale, and that's how he got his name. Claiborne was a successful breeding farm, but had never won the Kentucky Derby. Their hopes for 1984 rested originally on Devil's Bag, the champion 2-year-old who had won 5 races by 27 lengths, so highly touted that he was called the next Secretariat by Time magazine, something that should immediately guarantee disappointment, which it did. Devil's Bag didn't run in the Kentucky Derby, being injured the week of, and then being retired shortly afterward due to a bone chip in his right knee. Other heralded favorites had also dropped out due to injury, making Swale the de facto favorite. But it wasn't so certain. He had won only 2 of his 4 preps, and in his last start was an 8-length loser in the mud, said to be his weakness. And his trainer, the great Woody Stevens, was fighting off pneumonia and emphysema, so Mike Griffin had to pinch hit leading up to the Derby. Instead, the favorite was a coupled entry of fillies trained by D. Wayne Lucas, Life's Magic, and Altea. Altea already having beaten the boys in the Arkansas Derby, but neither filly showed up, and Swale rested behind the leaders before taking over the lead to win by a commanding 3 1/4 lengths. All swale that ends swale was the toast to celebrate Claiborne's first Derby win. But after blowing his energy in a lightning-fast workout and not liking the hard ground of Pimlico, he faded to 7th in the Preakness. While disappointing, he was brought back for the Belmont Stakes and trained up to it way better. With an easy pace, he took the 3rd jewel by 4 lengths, giving Woody Stevens his 3rd straight Belmont Stakes, en route to an unheard of 5 straight. But just 8 days after taking 2 jewels of the Triple Crown, while getting a bath following a routine gallop, he reared up and collapsed. Within minutes, he was gone. The initial theory was heart failure, but the autopsy revealed no definitive cause of death, as there was no major ruptures or gross lesions in the heart. The most that was discovered was scar tissue, which could have caused an irregular heartbeat and cardiac arrest, but this was stressed by the vets to be only a possibility, and not something that could be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Posthumously, he was voted champion 3-year-old and was buried at Claiborne Farm, something usually only done for their stallions, but after providing Claiborne with their first Derby win, they knew he was a worthy exception. Spend a buck. Imagine a prize greater than the Triple Crown. While there have been a few times in recent memory a horse bypassed the Triple Crown, it was usually due to injury. For Spend a Buck, befitting his name, it was money. A $2 million bonus. A purse greater than the 3 Triple Crown races combined. As a 2-year-old, he was just shy of top tier, finishing 3rd in the inaugural Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which was also the very first Breeders' Cup race ever run. But as a 3-year-old, he'd bloom in New Jersey, running at the renovated Garden State Park, which had reopened that year following a fire in 1977 and a lofty reconstruction project by its new owner. As part of their grand opening season, they offered a unique bonus. If a horse won the Cherry Hill Mile, Garden State Stakes, Kentucky Derby, and the Jersey Derby, they would get a $2 million bonus, which combined with regular purses to a total prize of $2.6 million, the greatest ever offered at the time. Well, it just so happened Spendabuck had prepared for the Derby by winning the first 2 legs of this great prize, and then won the Kentucky Derby, his 3rd race in 4 weeks, with a bold front-running strategy that would defeat a lesser horse. He ran fast fractions throughout, the most exceptional being that he ran the fastest 1 mile in Derby history, 1 minute 34.8, en route to a 5 1/4 length score, and the 4th fastest Kentucky Derby ever recorded. Any other year, he'd be off to Baltimore, touted as the next Triple Crown hopeful, but the Jersey Derby bonus was just too great, and he controversially skipped the Triple Crown. Out of the gate, this looked like a mistake, after stumbling 2 strides after the start. He would then run the opening quarter, half a mile, and 3/4 fractions, even faster than in his Kentucky Derby, at the same distance, with constant pressure from Huddle Up, and when Huddle Up tired, he would then have to fight off the eventual Belmont Stakes winner Creme Fraiche and the closer El Bosco to win the bonus in a thriller. He had every right to lose. Those insane fractions and the relentless assault from other horses should have burnt him out, but he did it, winning the greatest cash prize ever seen until Smarty Jones in 2004. After 2 more races, he retired due to injury and lived to the age of 20, still today a unique horse in the Derby's history and a very underappreciated one, with the outrageous speed he displayed. After the Jersey Derby incident, the Triple Crown would create their own bonus system, guaranteeing that no horse would ever be swayed on the same path as him, making Spendabuck stand alone. Monarchos. To run the greatest 2 minutes in sports in under 2 minutes is an extraordinary feat. Most think of Secretariat's still standing record, but in 2001, it happened one more time, and I'm not talking about Daft Punk. It was a perfect storm. The blazing heat caused the track to be sprayed with water regularly, creating an extremely fast, packed-down surface that already had 3 track records set on it in the undercard. The favorite was Point Given, a 17 one-hand Goliath, trained by Bob Baffert. In a different year, he could have been a Triple Crown winner, but the hard, fast ground was to his chagrin, and to the aid of Monarchos, a 10-1 shot whose lone stakes win was the Florida Derby, and had most recently lost to the other Baffert trainee, Congaree, in the Wood Memorial. But trainer John Ward knew this loss was the exact prep Monarchos needed to get ready for the big one. Song and a Prayer was sent to the lead and ran the fastest half a mile and 3/4 mile fractions ever clocked. It set up perfectly for Monarchos to swoop past the flat Point Given and turn the tables on Congaree, stopping the clock in 1 minute 59.97 seconds. The rest of that season belonged to Point Given, who went undisputed, and Monarchos never won again, at studs siring winners in America, Japan, Brazil, and Sweden, passing away at age 18 from a ruptured intestine. For the most part, he was a one-hit wonder, but in that one great moment, he put his name forever next to racing's greatest, the second fastest Kentucky Derby winner. Strike the Gold. From birth, this closer had to come from behind. Born a dummy foal, he spent his first days of life on oxygen, being fed with tubes unable to nurse. And when he was 4 months old, his mother Majestic Gold passed away due to colic. A tough childhood, but Strike the Gold was a tougher horse. By Derby Day, he was 3rd choice and had beaten the favorite and 2nd choice, Hansel and Fly So Free, once each. The field was wide open, featuring other great future champions like the eventual Hall of Famer Best Pal and the tailless wonder Sea Cadet. Strike the Gold's trainer, Nick Zito, had only ran his first Derby horse a year prior with 36 red and had finished 9th. Already, he was back with another pink-silked chestnut horse, ready to try again. This time with the guidance of Chris Antley, Strike the Gold closed from 12th, At the top of the stretch, he went to the far outside, with Zito screaming from the stands, "Show me the way." Strike the Gold powered away, springboarding his earnings past the million mark and Zito's career, while giving his sire Alidar a posthumous Derby victory. In a twist, Strike the Gold's first ever victory was the same day Alidar died, November 15th, 1990. And in another unrelated twist, the race run right after the Derby was won by Strike the Gold's older brother, Gradar. For the rest of his career, Strike the Gold was an enthusiastic participant, running 31 times, the most starts by a Derby winner since 1982. He'd only win 6 of them, but was in the top 3 19 times, and those few wins he did have included the $1 million Pimlico Special against former Derby foes Fly So Free and Best Pal, and the Grade 2 Nassau County Handicap. By the end of his long, hard-fought career, he had earned $3.4 million, $2.4 million of it coming after the Kentucky Derby. No matter what, he tried to fly late and get a piece of the action, and when it mattered most, he did indeed strike the gold. Go for Gin. Just 3 years after Strike the Gold, Nick Zito, 2 of the horse's co-owners, and a jockey named Chris were back. Only this time, it was Chris McCarron, who had guided Alidar's other Derby horse, Ali Sheba, to victory. The hype was around Holy Bull, a blazing fast gray who'd go on to do amazing things, but one of the few blemishes on his record came in the miserably muddy 1994 Kentucky Derby. The normally aggressive frontrunner was flat, and toiled to 12th place, his trainer even later claiming that the horse was secretly drugged, but with no suspect named and no blood sample, whether this was true or not, we'll never know. Instead, it was 5th choice Go for Gin's day. A solid horse, but one that hadn't won since January, coming in on a 3-race losing streak. With the mud, the strategy was to use Go for Gin's early speed and get him to the lead, so he wouldn't have to deal with the wet kickback. After veering outward, there wasn't an anxious moment. He led all the way without a speck of mud on his bay coat. Zito and McCarron both getting their second Derby wins. And afterward, Zito was called on the phone and congratulated by none other than President of the United States, Bill Clinton. It was the last time Go for Gin won. Tabasco Cat took the rest of the Triple Crown, and Holy Bull dominated the rest of 94. Go for Gin retired after 9 more races, and after an underwhelming stud career, pensioned in 2011, joining McCarron's other Derby horse Ali Sheba by retiring and spending the rest of his days at the Kentucky Horse Park. Enjoying many treats, parades in the Hall of Champions, splashing his water bucket, nice naps, and his absolute favorite, getting his gums massaged. Until he passed away at the age of 31, pampered and beloved. Thunder Gulch. The 1995 Triple Crown was Dwayne Lucas's, but the way he achieved it was from an unexpected source. Everyone focused on his champion 2-year-old Timber Country and his brilliant filly Serena's Song, who were coupled favorites. His third horse, Thunder Gulch, was nearly 25-1 after finishing 4th in the Bluegrass, but before that, he had won the Florida Derby by a nose. While he was the third wheel, those closest to him knew he had talent. Jockey Gary Stevens was confident enough that he thought he was going to win before the gates even opened. Resting off of Serena's Song, she would fade after setting the pace, and Thunder Gulch encountered no strife. An easy transition of power from one Lucas horse to the other. He gave Lucas and Stevens their second Derby win. The supposed oddball had gotten the job done. Lucas would win each of the Triple Crown races that year, but not all with Thunder Gulch. Timber Country would take the Preakness, with Thunder Gulch third, and then in the Belmont, it was back to Thunder Gulch. After the Triple Crown, Thunder Gulch won 3 more races in a row, including the Travers Stakes, but in a heralded matchup between him and the best older horse Cigar, he fractured his left cannon bone and was retired. Going on to be a great stud, named the best sire of 2001 for his son Point Given, who also won 2 of 3 Triple Crown races. He passed away peacefully at 25. Street Sense. The 2007 Kentucky Derby was one of the most loaded in recent memory. Any Given Saturday, Justify's future dad Scat Daddy, and Giacomo's half-brother were all footnotes to 3 horses who commenced a bitter rivalry with this race. The fast but gutsy frontrunner Heartspun, the lightly raced freak Curlin trying to break the Apollo curse, and Street Sense, the champion 2-year-old. 28 years ago, Spectacular Bid was the last champion 2-year-old to win the Kentucky Derby. Karl Nafzger had already won the Derby once with Unbridled, but could he do it again with Street Sense? Over 156,000 people were there to bear witness, including Queen Elizabeth. As Hardspun set the pace, Street Sense dropped all the way back to 19th place, 19.5 lengths behind the leaders, only ahead of I'm a Wild and Crazy Guy. But jockey Calvin Burrell, affectionately called Calvin Bo-Rail, would use his signature move and have Street Sense hug the inside as he navigated through the pack. He only had to pass Hardspun by the time they hit the top of the stretch, and as he breezed on past him, the Derby was won. A first of 3 Derbies in 4 years for Calvin, and a second for Nafzger. But Street Sense would see a lot more of Hardspun and third place finisher Curlin. In the Preakness, Curlin ran down Street Sense, and then Curlin himself was run down by a filly in Rags to Riches, while Hardspun was further behind. As Hardspun and Curlin would duke it out again in the Haskell Invitational, Street Sense would go to Saratoga and have his last major success on the track with a win in the Travers Stakes, the 9th and last horse to win both the Derby and Travers. He'd finish his rivalry with Hardspun by finishing twice behind him, each one having 2 wins over the other. Meanwhile, Curlin would beat them both in the Breeders' Cup Classic, making it 2-1 in Curlin's favor, as he then went on as a 4-year-old to become the first American horse to earn $10 million. After all 3 horses retired, they would all become successful sires, producing Grade 1 winners the world over. This millennium, there are few runnings of the Derby that had such a star-studded cast, all successful in similar and different ways on and off track. And the winner of it all that day was a horse with a unique combination of wins that made up over 20 lengths in a breathtaking rail-skimming show. Nyquist. J. Paul Reddam has already been established to have loved naming horses after his wife, the highlight being I'll Have Another. But if he didn't name a horse after his wife, he was going to name them after a Detroit Red Wings player. Not all of them were successful, but he struck gold when he acquired Nyquist, named after Gustav Nyquist. With the 2016 Derby 1 year removed from American Pharoah, 167,000 attended, the second highest ever, and favorite Nyquist couldn't have looked any better. A champion 2-year-old who had never lost in 7 races on both coasts, and with a perfect trip, he was then able to win the Kentucky Derby just as easily, joining a chosen few to have won the Kentucky Derby while undefeated. But the only way to go after the Derby was down. In the mud, Derby runner-up Exaggerator defeated him in the Preakness and then the Haskell Stakes, and Nyquist would finally retire after 3 straight losses and a puffy ankle, reminding Derby historians of the 1922 Derby winner Morvich, who went unbeaten in 12 races including the Derby, and then similarly was unable to win again. The 2016 3-year-old crop proved full of surprises, as Nyquist, even in his prime, was not the best horse that year, as Arrogate won the Travers in record time, and then defeated the seemingly invincible California Chrome in what turned out to be a similarly amazing but fleeting streak of dominance. Nyquist currently stands at stud, with multiple champions on dirt and on the grass. Always Dreaming. Anthony Bonomo Jr. was given a $200,000 budget by his dad for their ownership group to buy a horse at the 2015 Keeneland September sale. He spent $350,000 that day, and at the time, Senior wasn't very happy. But by May of 2017, he had nothing but gratitude. His wife, Mary, would give the horse his name, based on herself, as she was a self-proclaimed daydreamer. Always Dreaming would start out winless as a 2-year-old, but with a tried-and-true duo of trainer Todd Pletcher and jockey John Velasquez, and some time off, he began to blossom. Pletcher and Velasquez had worked together since 1996 and had won over 1,600 races at the time. They had won derbies before, but never with each other. Always Dreaming would get them back to Louisville by winning 3 straight races by 20.5 lengths, highlighted by the Florida Derby. In 4 months, he had become the slight favorite. And with an easy trip on a wet surface, Always Dreaming stopped dreaming, and instead made it happen, giving trainer Todd Pletcher and jockey John Velasquez their team victory, and his multiple owners a memory to last forever. He would race another 5 times, but the Derby was to be his final win. He became a modest stud, with the highlight of his brood being Pennsylvania Derby winner Saudi Crown, but he only needed 1 race to give everyone involved the rare chance to achieve the ultimate horse racing dream. the Kentucky Derby. Super Saver. It was a derby of firsts and lasts. The sun had come out at the perfect time, after torrential rains made the track a swamp. Super Saver was second choice, but that was after the loss of the race's favorite, his stablemate, Escandarea, who retired due to a leg injury. Todd Pletcher may have lost his most obvious choice for the Derby, but he rarely had just one horse. Super Saver hadn't won since November of the previous year, when he set a stakes record in the Kentucky Jockey Club Stakes at Churchill Downs, but he did stay in the top 3 in his 2 starts at 3. Devil May Care also ran for Todd Pletcher, being the last filly to participate in the Kentucky Derby. The slight favorite was Lookin' at Lucky, who was anything but on Derby Day. He was also the highest priced favorite ever, at 6-1. When the gates opened, Lookin' at Lucky lost all chance, being in post number 1 and getting squeezed out. Meanwhile, Super Saver rested off the leaders on the inside under the guidance of Calvin Burrell. True to form, Calvin used his signature rail skimming tactics and got Super Saver a perfect trip to clinch a 3rd Derby in just 4 years. Something never to be repeated. Todd got his first Derby, and Calvin got his last. Super Saver retired after 2 more races, and as a stud proved successful, with champion sprinter Run Happy and Mexican-American champion mare Latruska being his star pupils. Animal Kingdom. The 2011 Kentucky Derby holds a special place in my heart, as it was the first Kentucky Derby I ever watched, and boy was it spicy. John Velasquez and trainer Graham Motion got unfun surprises the week of the Derby. Velasquez was preparing to ride his 13th Derby horse, the Morning Line second choice, Uncle Mo, but he was scratched the day before, putting him out of a mount. Meanwhile, Motion lost his main Derby horse, Wood Memorial Stakes winner Toby's Corner, 4 days before the Derby. Ironically, he was the first horse to defeat Uncle Mo. Both of their lucks would change with Motion's other Derby hopeful, Animal Kingdom, but not after just a bit more chaos. Animal Kingdom's original rider, Robbie Alvarado, had fallen off a horse 3 days before the Derby and broken his nose. But this is where it got messy. Robbie was cleared to ride on Derby Day and even won the Grade 1 Humane Distaff 4 hours before the Derby, but Animal Kingdom's owner and breeder, Barry Irwin, thought he wasn't fit to ride his horse, and swapped him for Velasquez. And so, John now had a ride in the Derby on a horse he had never ridden before. Not ideal, but something every jockey has to deal with. Florida Derby winner Dialed In was the 5-1 favorite, with Pants on Fire the new second choice, ridden by Rosie Napravnik, the 6th woman to ride in the Kentucky Derby. Animal Kingdom was nearly 21-1 by post time, and for a rather big reason. He had never raced on dirt. His 4 previous starts were all on synthetic and turf surfaces. All bettors had to go on was an impressive workout the week before that convinced a few experts, but most still disregarded him. Staying behind early, he rallied on the outside to take over from Shackelford and Nero to comfortably win by just under 3 lengths, giving all involved their first Derby wins. To this day, Animal Kingdom is the only horse to win the Kentucky Derby without a previous start on dirt. In fact, the Derby was his only win on dirt. After the Triple Crown, he was forced to take the rest of the year off due to a slab fracture, and when he won his returning race, he fractured the same leg, losing another 8 months. In a remarkable feat, after such a hiatus and encountering awful traffic, he flew from 5th to 2nd in just 100 yards during the Breeders' Cup Mile behind Hall of Fame gelding Wisedan, and then as a 5-year-old, he took the $10 million Dubai World Cup on synthetic. Only Silver Charm had won both the Derby and World Cup before him. Despite soundness issues, Animal Kingdom was one of the most uniquely accomplished Derby winners, with his successes at the highest level on all 3 racing surfaces and on 2 continents. Orb. Trainer Shug McGahee and the Phipps family had worked closely for decades. Ogden Phipps, born in 1908, came from a rich family so powerful they once owned 28 miles of Florida coastline. Phipps' history of racing is extensive, with many famous champions over the decades, but he never won the Kentucky Derby. The closest was when he and McGahee finished second with Easy Goer behind Sunday Silence in '89. He passed away in 2002, and his son Mills Phipps inherited the stable. In 2013, 1 generation removed, they had their shot with Orb. Orb had lost his first 4 races, but then he won his next 5 consecutively, the last of which came on a miserably wet Derby day. Palace Malice set insanely fast early fractions, while Orb waited behind horses. With his dark bay coat a shade lighter due to the mud, Orb rolled through the pack, unbothered by kickback, and finally gave the Phipps family and McGahee a Derby winner. It was to be his final win. Orb seemed to always do things in streaks. When he won, he was on a roll, and when he lost, he was in a slump. He lost his first and last 4 races in a row, with all of his wins being sandwiched into one winning streak. He still had decent showings, with a third in the Belmont and Travers Stakes, but Will Take Charge would live up to his name and steal champion 3-year-old honors thanks to a riveting post-Triple Crown campaign. In terms of legacy, Orb hasn't been a successful stud, but he helped round out an already great career for Shogun the Phippses. Authentic. Ironically, his Derby was not a very traditional one. The COVID-19 pandemic affected every facet of life, including horse racing. The Derby was postponed for 4 months to the first Saturday in September in an attempt to have people be able to physically attend the event, but the pandemic lasted longer than expected, leading to a spectatorless Derby, the first in its history. The only people who were there were connections, broadcast people, and on the outside were protesters, who wanted the Derby canceled due to the police murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville that March. Along with the September Derby, the Triple Crown was also completely reshaped. The Belmont was run in later June at 1 1/8, the Derby in September, and the Preakness in October. It was only the 3rd time that the first Saturday in May wasn't run in May, and the only time the Triple Crown has taken this form. The delay also gave Authentic the chance to mature, as he was blazingly fast, but distracted, having trouble focusing as he looked in and out. But even with this room for improvement, he had only lost 1 race and was the winner of the Haskell Invitational by the time of the Derby. But his sprinter breeding and narrow win in that Haskell made distance a concern, so instead all the favoritism went to Tiz the Law, owned and trained by the same connections as Funnyside, who had strung together 4 straight, including the Belmont and Travers Stakes. The field was the smallest since 1998, at 15, with 2 horses not even receiving qualifying points on the extended Road to the Kentucky Derby Series, and with many of the strongest contenders from the originally scheduled May 2nd date on the sidelines. If all this wasn't enough first for the Derby's history, Churchill Downs debuted a new contraption, a custom 20-horse starting gate, getting rid of the old method of a 6-horse auxiliary gate being stitched onto the original 14-horse gate. As this new gate opened, it was Authentic on the outside, taking the lead early in front of the ghostly Twin Spires. He led the whole way around, giving Bob Baffert his 6th Derby win, tying him with Ben Jones for the most in history, and John Velasquez his 3rd, while also providing Authentic's over 4,000 owners from MyRacehorse.com the thrill of saying they owned a Derby horse. For $206 a share, MyRacehorse.com offered micro shares in their 12.5% ownership of the horse. A thoroughbred having multiple owners wasn't new, but had never been done quite like this before. In the winner's circle, to round out an already chaotic Derby, Authentic spooked when given his roses and knocked over Bob Baffert. 1 month later, he would run in the Preakness, where in a head-to-head duel, he was beaten by the Philly Swiss Skydiver, who became the 6th filly to win the Preakness Stakes after previously losing the Kentucky Oaks only a day before Authentic's Derby win. But in the Preakness, she looked the Derby winner Authentic right in the eye and denied him the race. To wrap out his career, Authentic broke American Pharoah's Keeneland track record in the Breeders' Cup Classic against older horses, and then was sent to stud at Spendthrift Farm. Alana Dale. You may not know his name, but you've probably seen this picture before. This is Alana Dale being ridden by Jimmy Winkfield, in what would be the last time a black jockey won the Kentucky Derby, ending an era of dominance that did not need to conclude. By this point, black jockeys had already been slowly pushed out due to Jim Crow, discrimination from the Jockey Club, founded in the 1890s, and white jockeys purposely attacking black jockeys mid-race, endangering the horse and the rider, discouraging owners for concern over their horse. Wink, as he was called, was considered the last in the era of great African-American jockeys, already winning with His Eminence the year before. His 3rd straight Derby mount was Alana Dale, and he was a very fast but unsound horse, showing plenty of speed as a 2-year-old, but with bad knees. The Derby was his first start at 3. His training, to reduce strain on his legs, was mainly him pulling a sulky, rather than being ridden under saddle. Still, Wink was able to guide the fragile horse to victory. Alana Dale led by 6 lengths at one point, but was injured in the stretch and barely held on. It was his first and last start at 3, but the most important in a 37-race career, as Jimmy Winkfield became the second jockey to win back-to-back derbies. Thomas Clay McDowell became the first person to breed, train, and own a Derby winner all at once, and Alonadale sire Halma became the first winner of the Kentucky Derby to then sire a Kentucky Derby winner himself. While Alonadale continued to race for years, with 37 starts and 17 wins, a decent stud career, and living a full life of 26 years, Jimmy Winkfield's future, while fruitful, was turbulent. His time in America was quite short, leaving only a year after his Derby win in 1903 for many reasons, such as the aforementioned rampant racism, shrinking job opportunities, and a specific incident where he failed to honor a verbal agreement to ride a horse for a wealthy owner and was quickly blacklisted. If there's one takeaway to Wink's story, it's that as one door closes, another one opens. He left America at the age of 23 to be hired in Russia by Tsar Nicholas. Through the chaos of the October Revolution and both World Wars, Jimmy traveled around Europe, winning in many countries and then transitioning into a trainer in his later years. His amazing, long-lasting, and tumultuous career received a posthumous recognition in the National Racing Museum of Hall of Fame 30 years after his passing. Fast forward to today, after a 79-year gap from 1921 to 2000, 3 jockeys have ridden in the Derby: Marlon St. Julien, Kevin Krieger, and Kendrick Carmouche, along with black owners and trainers also slowly entering more Derby horses, giving hope that as we acknowledge the history of the Derby, we also use it to make a better, more diverse future. Hopefully one day, Wink and Alonadale will no longer be the last. Swaps. California has been the birthplace to many great racehorses, but none will ever be as good as the California Comet. Going into the 1955 Kentucky Derby, he was a clear second choice to East Coast favorite Nashua of Bel Air Stud, the same barn and trainer as Triple Crown winners Gallant Fox and Omaha. Nashua had already cleaved through many premier East races, like the Flamingo Stakes and Florida Derby, with Summertan being his immediate rival. Seemingly a world apart in California was Swaps, who had won the Santa Anita Derby. Only one California bred had won the Derby before, in Morvich, and California horses were generally underestimated outside of their home state. But on Derby Day, Swaps and Bill Shoemaker stole the race on the front end, defeating Nashua and Eddie Arcaro, giving California a second Derby score. And as soon as he went to the East, he was back in California, skipping the Triple Crown. Trainer Mesh Tenney and owner Rex Ellsworth preferred the rich purses of home, and had Swaps run in the Californian against older horses, the highlight of which being the 1954 Derby winner, Determine, beating him in a new world record time. He later won the American Derby on grass, equaling the American record, before he had his famous rematch with Nashua, who swept the Preakness in Belmont in his absence. The match race at Washington Park was hailed as the decider for Horse of the Year and a battle between great horses and jockeys, Nashua and Arcaro, Swaps and Shoemaker, and like most match races, it was lopsided, with Swaps running sore and being easily defeated. Nashua would go on to be crowned Champion 3-year-old and Horse of the Year, a feat that coincided with the shocking death of his owner, William Woodward Jr., who was shot and killed by his wife, who thought he was a burglar. Under new management, Nashua would go on to win 6 of 10 races in the East as a 4-year-old. Meanwhile, Swaps did 2 things best: carry heavy weights and smash records on the West Coast. 6 times, he won carrying 130 pounds, and set 5 world records in that season alone, from 1 mile to 1 mile and 5/8. That is the most that any horse in history has ever held at once. Not even famous record setters like Man o' War, Secretariat, or Ruffian ever broke that many records, let alone world records, and he usually won them with minimal encouragement to boot. Unfortunately, his record-breaking season ended prematurely when he fractured his hind leg in New Jersey. Sonny Jim Fitzsimmons, the trainer of his arch-rival Nashua, gave Swaps' connections a special sling to help him heal. The generous act helped save Swaps' life despite him losing 300 pounds, and he was able to retire to stud duty. While none were as good as him, he did go on to sire his own Derby and Belmont Stakes winner in Chateaugay, passing at 20 years old. Not every record he set lasted, but his mile and 5/8 record at Hollywood Park still remains untouched. And 59 years after his Derby win, Swaps' former exercise rider, Art Sherman, would train another famous Calbred Kentucky Derby winner, California Chrome. Mage. In 2018, Good Magic had the misfortune of being the second best horse on Derby Day, as eventual Triple Crown winner Justify ran home the winner. 5 years later, Good Magic's first crop turned 3 years old, and with no time to lose, Mage and Reincarnate were his first Derby representatives. Unfortunately, the build-up to the Derby was rife with controversy, as 7 horses died at Churchill Downs in the days leading up to it, including 2 on Derby Day, casting a shadow over the race and haunting the rest of the meet before it was then moved to Ellis Park when the toll reached 12 horses. A later investigation found no link to these deaths, further adding to the mystery. 18 horses ran in the 149th Kentucky Derby, with Mage being the least experienced with 3 starts all at Gulfstream Park in Florida. He had only won his first start and got into the Derby after a courageous second in the Florida Derby to the scratched former favorite Forte. He also had never ran a 2, so he faced the Apollo Curse, but jockey Javier Castellano was ready to go. He had not won a Derby in 15 previous tries, but from 16th place in his 16th try, he guided Mage to the front, defeating the Apollo Curse and giving himself his first Derby win along with his connections. With Castellano and trainer Gustavo Delgado both being Venezuelan, the win conjured some nostalgia for Cannonade II. It was the last win for Mage. He would only race 3 more times, with 2 in-the-money showings, but he couldn't put it all together again. Castellano went on to win his first Belmont Stakes that same year with Arcangelo. An injury derailed his 4-year-old plans, so he now stands at stud. In a unique piece of history, the following year, his full brother Dornick would also run in the Kentucky Derby in 2024, and then later win the Belmont Stakes. The last time 2 full siblings both won Triple Crown races was in 1927 and 1928 with Whiskery and Victorian. A lot of history for a horse who only ran 7 times. Mystik Dan. In 2024, the Kentucky Derby was run for the 150th time, a truly monumental milestone for the longest continually held American sporting event. And this special renewal would live up to all measures. Mystik Dan was an 18-1 outsider who had won the Southwest Stakes by 8 lengths, but was then 3rd in the Arkansas Derby, causing some doubt, along with his pedigree, as he was sired by a miler in Golden Sense who had failed to impress when he ran in the Derby in 2013. Still, his connections had confidence in the horse, his name coming from one of his owners, Daniel Hamby III, whose father, Daniel Hamby Jr., sold a product called Mystik Tape as his first business exploit. The day before the Derby, trainer Kenny McPeak and jockey Brian Hernandez Jr. had teamed up to win the Kentucky Oaks with Torpedo Anna. Mystik Dan would be their shot at a rare double, but they'd have to go through some major adversaries. 2-year-old champion Fierceness, who had won the Florida Derby, bluegrass winner Sierra Leone, and unbeaten Japanese invader Forever Young. The final quarter mile of the 150th Derby would be as thrilling as ever. Mystik Dan found an opening just wide enough to get through on the inside, passing tired frontrunners, including favorite Fierceness, to take the lead at the top of the stretch. But on the outside, Sierra Leone and Forever Young brought up the rear. But as they flew, Sierra Leone began to veer in, a problem that he had displayed before, bumping into Forever Young multiple times. Their stretch feud ended up deciding everything. Mystik Dan kept his eyes on the prize, but his lead was waning. The 3 horses would hit the wire together. The first triple photo finish since 1947. History and 3rd place, winning $3 million or $500,000, separated by inches. At the finish line, it was Mystik Dan by a nose. He had become the 150th winner of the Kentucky Derby. Brian Hernandez and Kenny McPeak had both done double. The last time a jockey and trainer duo took both the Oaks and Derby in the same year was in 1952, when trainer Ben Jones and jockey Eddie Arcaro guided Real Delight and Hillgale to the winner's circle. After this incredible win, Mystik Dan would participate in the other 2 jewels of the Triple Crown, finishing 2nd in the Preakness and 8th in the Belmont. He is currently resting up for a 4-year-old campaign in 2025. And that concludes our 3rd layer of the Kentucky Derby Iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next layer is when we go so deep under the ocean, we no longer see light, and start getting into the stories from the Kentucky Derby you rarely ever hear about. Stay tuned, and see you guys next time.